My fellow Americans, welcome to The Celluloid President, the podcast about American presidents on film. Today we're discussing 7 Days in May, the 1964 political thriller about an attempted military coup d'etat. I'm Gary Holmes, and joining me today via Zoom from California is Jim Robinson. Jim, if we smoked as many cigarettes and drank as many dry martinis as they do in this movie, do you think we'd still be alive?
No, but what a way to go, right, Gary? I mean, the martinis, maybe. I would point out that Kirk Douglas was very understandably downing them in the presence of the incomparable Ava Gardner, and he ended up living till 103. So, maybe there's something to martinis after all.
Yeah,
Were you?
I've got another thought though. I mean, there's something about that post-war lifestyle that was just deadly for people of that generation, especially men. In the second scene of the movie, we see the president, played by Frederick March, getting a physical, and you can really believe that he needs a lifestyle change. I mean, he looks so unhealthy. When you think that this was filmed when March was in his early 60s, that's about the same age that Tom Cruise is today. The idea
Yeah.
that Frederick March would be riding a motorcycle or parachuting out of an airplane is completely ridiculous.
Well, I actually checked, and for men, the life expectancy back then was about 66, and today it's 76. So we happen to be smack dab in the middle of those extra 10 years, Gary. So
Yeah.
thank God for lifestyle changes.
All right.
Were your parents into martinis?
Oh no, no. My
They were,
father would drink one Manhattan. If we went out for dinner to a restaurant, he'd drink one Manhattan. And then my mother drank wine, I guess.
well,
And
I witnessed your father and his Manhattan. My parents were into them. They were very big in the early 60s.
oh
It,
yeah,
it was almost a fashion thing, and
yeah.
everyone bought all the accoutrements and mixed them very carefully. And James Bond helped them along
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I drank martinis for a long time, and they're great, I have to say. They pack a punch.
yeah. Well, this is not the celluloid martini, so
Okay, yes. So listen, the director of this movie, John Frankenheimer, was one of the hottest directors in Hollywood for in the 1960s. In addition to 7 Days in May, he was responsible for The Birdman of Alcatraz, The Manchurian Candidate, and Grand Prix. Do you have any thoughts on this guy?
well, he cut his teeth in the golden age of television, the television noir, you might call it, the
Right.
live black and white dramas, which some still acclaim as the best TV ever. And he seemed to be most mainly an issues director who would establish a strong sense of the environment and atmosphere surrounding, big, important, dramatic issues. I saw a few of his movies, Birdman of Alcatraz, Manchurian Candidate, of course, Grand Prix. He strikes me as quite liberal, but on the other hand, it's worth remembering that in Manchurian Candidate, that seems to give credence to the idea that the communists did want to take over the United States. If you think about the plot of that movie.
Yeah, no, I know. I think that's a very good movie, even better than 7 Days in May. You can tell that he did come out of TV because his style, he doesn't have a lot of director flourishes like the great ones did. There's a lot of emphasis on close-ups, people talking in the room, slow building suspense. And he's very open about his liberal leanings. He loved JFK. In fact, JFK, who was a no fan of his military advisors, was very eager for this movie to be made. He even left Washington one weekend so Frankenheimer could film the opening scene, which is a riot outside the White House.
Yeah, both he and JFK and Bobby read the book, and over dinner with Kirk Douglas, JFK said a movie's got to be made of this, and supposedly believed it could really happen based on his experiences.
I mean, and then he was very close to Bobby Kennedy too. He was actually at Bobby Kennedy's house the night before no, Bobby Kennedy stayed at his house, Frankenheimer's house, the night before he was killed after the presidential primary in 1968. And he was there when Kennedy was killed. So I apparently this so upset him that it kind of, he took a break from making movies, and I don't think he was really ever the same afterwards. All right. Well, speaking of the movie, let me give you a summary of what this is all about for those of you out there who haven't seen it. 7 Days in May is based on a novel of the same name, which I read in high school, about an attempted military coup. The premise of the film is that the US is on the verge of implementing a treaty with the Soviet Union that would eliminate all nuclear weapons in both countries. The military, led by General John Mattoon Scott, the messianic chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, played by Burt Lancaster, vehemently opposes this treaty. They plan to take over the government 7 days after the movie starts. Scott's aide, Jiggs Casey, played by Kirk Douglas, slowly learns of the plot and brings the news to the president, Jordan Lyman. Lyman doesn't believe it at first, but he sends his trusted friends to get proof. One lands in a military jail, and the other dies in a mysterious plane crash. And as the days tick away, Lyman doesn't want to go public with the accusation because it would be terrible for democracy if the country were to learn about the pending coup. So he calls Scott to the Oval Office and demands his resignation. Scott and Lyman argue about who's the worst traitor. Lyman briefly considers releasing love letters that the married Scott wrote to his girlfriend, Ava Gardner, which Jiggs Casey had purloined from Ava's apartment. But ever the Boy Scout, Lyman decides that would be too sleazy. Scott refuses to resign, and in the climax of the movie, Lyman gets solid proof about the conspiracy, and the other members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff resign rather than face exposure, leaving Scott with no allies to pull off his coup.
That's pretty good, Gary. I read the book too. Fletcher Nebel, who wrote a number of books like that, and I always enjoy those kind of books.
Yeah, I mean there was a time there in when I was in junior high and high school when I was like eating these things up, these
Yeah.
political presidential thrillers.
How did the movie do?
Well, the movie was well received. It earned $3.7 million in rentals. I don't know where it ranked in 1964, but it was considered a hit. Not a smash like Poppins and My Fair Lady, which had about $30 million each in earnings. Rounding out the top five for the year were Goldfinger, the Carpenters, and sorry, not the Carpenters, the Carpetbaggers, and From Russia with Love. This was also the year that one of our favorites, Dr. Strangelove, came out.
It
Um,
was also a year of notorious flops. Cleopatra, Fall of the Roman Empire, these bloated historical dramas, Longships, Beckett, even Zulu flopped at first and later recouped. But I think it's easy to see how audience tastes were changing. They weren't so much interested anymore in what was. They weren't particularly interested in what is. The realism would come later, particularly in the 70s, but they were very interested in what if. And
yeah,
you can see that in the spy craze movie, the Bond craze. What if this set of circumstances happened? What if this madman tried to take over the world? So it's interesting how I think this movie came out at a kind of a crossroads in audience taste, and studios like were almost going bankrupt because of some of their flops.
well, the 60s were a time of tremendous turmoil anyway, and one way this was shown was in their the changing tastes in movies, as you pointed out. The studios had spent a lot of money on big blockbuster things because they thought that was going to, what can the movies do that television can't? And what can movies do is they can offer spectacle. Well, the spectacle has to be good. But it turns out that movies like this is not that far away from some of these James Bond movies in terms of action and black and white and kind of not that expensive to make.
Yeah, yeah.
They were the more popular ones.
It's
Um,
interesting that it debuted 3 days after the Ed Sullivan Show had the Beatles on, and less than 3 months after JFK's killing. So
yeah,
it was really a jumble of things going on in the culture at this time. And so that I think adds to the interest, the historical interest for people that watch this movie beyond the entertainment value.
Yeah. All right. And I'll also just say that the film was nominated for two Academy Awards in 1965. Edmund O'Brien, who played the drunken senator from Georgia, was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. And the other nomination was for Best Art Direction, Set Direction, Black and White. So, I
Oh,
mean,
well,
it was a,
certainly, yeah,
it was respected movie.
yeah. I think it certainly deserved that second nomination. I mean, the
Right.
sets were a co-star for me. Established the atmosphere, the rain, the desert, the foreboding music, you know, everything that the characters played upon, the setting, to me, was really good.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good example of a movie that really benefits from being in black and white.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, what did you like about the movie?
Well, I'll put my cards on the table. I loved this movie.
Okay.
I had seen it before. I'd mostly forgotten it. I liked it better than The Manchurian Candidate, which I
Okay.
really liked. As I said, I liked the sets and the atmosphere. The pacing was good, the thumping some suspense, an intelligent script, and most of all, the acting, which I thought was universally top notch. How about you?
Yeah, well, I thought it was absorbing and propulsive. Not a lot of fat here, a lot of fast scenes with clip dialogue. I liked it pretty much myself. I also like the mental exercise of imagining what a coup in the United States would be like. What
Yeah,
steps would it actually take to engineer something like that?
right. And then have it hold afterward, which I think we'll talk about when we
Right.
later when we talk about historical plot devices. But I also like that it mostly avoided lampooning the conservative side of the debate. I mean, in the congressional hearings, in some of the private conversations, in the showdown between the president and the general, you did get both sides
Yeah.
of this debate, and even the hero Jiggs, who was tattletaling on his superior officer, when asked by the president, "Well, what do you think of my arms control agreement?" said, "I'm against it.
Yeah.
We can't trust the Soviets, but I also think that the military shouldn't fight a decision once the elected leadership makes that decision."
Right.
So I thought I liked that about it too.
No, you're right. It was pretty fair. And of course, I always love a peek into the 1960s sensibilities, starting in the very first scene, where there are two counter demonstrations outside the White House
Yeah,
that devolve into a riot. All the men on both sides of the issue are wearing ties, and all the women
yeah,
are wearing these nice dresses.
right. And so you think about today, where we still have old people at those demonstrations, but they have ponytails, blue hair, and tie-dye shirts that don't show off any physique. So along with their walkers and canes and
All right. All right. Do you have anything else you want to say about what you liked?
no.
All right. What didn't you like?
Well, it ended too soon for me, and which is a way of saying I really liked it. I could have been an hour longer and delved deeper into the origins of the plot. How did Scott actually approach the other chiefs and get them on board? A prequel to this movie could have been really interesting. But getting to real dislikes or question marks, call me undecided as to how the Ava Gardner scenes and subplot played out. I love her, but I thought the Jiggs and Eleanor scenes in her apartment seemed pretty stilted to me. And also the you got the sense that, well, we got to have a woman in the
Right.
cast. So
Right.
let's make up a scene. And they did the same with that when the drunken senator was in Texas and he had this long sort of pointless scene with the bar girl, the girl that was
Yeah.
opening up the bar, and it just sort of went on a little too long. At least there was a plot purpose to that. They needed to have he was investigating where this base was, and so it moved the plot point along there. But I'd say those were a couple of the things that I'm doubtful about.
Well, I mean, you put your finger on my number one dislike with the movie is like that repartee between Kirk Douglas and Ava Gardner. Rod Serling wrote the script, and I suppose this banter is supposed to be sophisticated, but it sounds like movie dialogue. And I'm going to give you a couple of lines right here. When he has to turn down a chance to drive her home after a party, she says, "All right, Jiggs, but just in case someone forgets to mention it, you're a great crutch. It's too bad you're only available 20 minutes at a time." And he says, "You can't tell. Sometimes the country can spare me for a whole evening. Give me a rain check and I'll prove it." And she says, "Tuck it somewhere safe where you won't forget it." I mean,
Yeah.
talks like that. And then when they're actually in the apartment, she says, "Don't tell me after all this time you're making a pass, Jiggs." And he says, "The window's open. You can always scream." And she says, "Is this where I scream? Do you want to scream?" That's a rather unfair question. I'm a little vulnerable now. I mean, this just reminds me of the Bogart and Bacall into Have and Have Not, except it's not anywhere near as good. I mean, this sort of
Yeah.
ring between male and female, it
Yeah,
doesn't
it
work.
was sort of like the leftovers from the film noir with femme fatale
Right.
kind of exchanges. I think what they were trying to do is make that scene sort of sad and pathetic, in terms of the way she was.
Yeah.
But it just didn't get pulled off properly, although it was very important to the plot, as it turned out. And I was holding my breath when he was searching through her wastebasket. And you knew he was going to get caught looking for the love letters
Right.
that she had thrown out. And you just knew it was going to happen. So that part was effective. But you're right about the dialogue.
Something else I didn't really like. The heart of the movie are these two long speeches by President Lyman about the Constitution, and they're just a little preachy. It seems kind of lazy to put the main thesis of the movie into a couple of speeches. Whatever happened to show, don't tell?
I'm glad you mentioned that because the other thing on my dislike list, and we as former speechwriters, I think the president really needed a better speechwriter. You're right. It was bromides. It was pedestrian rhetoric, whether you agreed with his points or not. And the contrast between his public speeches and his dialogue and his comments in private was really striking. He was much more forceful and eloquent in private, talking to staff and colleagues, as he was when went out into the public.
I have one other. This is a very small point, but the whole premise of this movie is that there's 7 days, and in the book, it's much more clear. There's day one, day two, day three, day four. And that built tension as you counted down to the seventh day. The movie tries to do the same by showing clocks and calendars at the start of each day, but it's not quite as effective as it would have been if they dissolved to a title card that said Monday or Tuesday. I mean, it's right in the title.
Oh, there you go with those title cards that I tend not to like.
Well,
I
yeah,
get your point. I
it's a
get your
device
point.
though. The whole movie is a device.
Right.
There are 7 days. Okay.
Actually, didn't need that device.
No,
There's
no.
nothing that said it had to be 7 days or 10 days, or it could have just unfolded as a plot that was found out about and stopped.
Yeah, I mean, they could have. They're halfway in between. They're trying to show the
Yeah.
7 days by, like, oh, there's a clock or a calendar or whatever. Okay, so what do you think the movie's trying to accomplish?
Well, I think it wanted to show the dangers of an out of control military that refuses to accept its place as a subordinate to civilian leadership, and also how vast bureaucracies and budgets, people running them, can get away with things under the radar. That certainly was and is true with the CIA. It's tougher now with the Pentagon because their budgets are much more transparent. And I think it also makes the case um, that arms treaties were the way we had to go in going forward, and which was still a relatively new concept in the early 60s, even though both Ike and JFK wanted to move in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of these movies where you don't have to search very hard to find out what the point of the movie is because they make it extremely explicit. As you say, it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of a politicized military or hardline anti-communism. Like a lot of Hollywood liberals, Frankenheimer was traumatized by efforts to root out communism in the entertainment industry. He was also an opponent of Senator Joseph McCarthy and was scared of right-wing generals like Douglas MacArthur, Curtis LeMay, and Edward Walker. But I actually thought the anti-military argument was made a lot more effectively in Doctor Strangelove, which lampooned rather than demonized the military.
Right, right. Yeah, I think, and the notion of it's a little simplistic, the notion of getting generals to stay out of politics. Are you kidding? They
Yeah,
are politicians, all of them, if
right,
not externally, internally. That's how they got to be generals.
right.
And so,
The different kind of
yeah,
politics that they play, though.
right,
They play
exactly.
bureaucratic politics.
Yeah, but I think you're right. It's pretty obvious. I do think though it does so reasonably respectfully to the other side, which posited that the Soviets just couldn't be trusted if
Yeah.
we made these agreements.
All right. So let's discuss the actors. As we discussed, the movie was produced by Kirk Douglas, who was at the height of his power and fame. He cast himself as Colonel Jiggs Casey, who uncovers the coup attempt, and then cast his friendly competitor, Burt Lancaster, as the master plotter, James Mattoon Scott. Well, let's start with Kirk Douglas, who appeared in Spartacus, The Bad and the Beautiful, Lustful Life, 2000 Leagues Under the Sea, Gunfight at the OK Corral. I mean, you've indicated before that you thought the acting was good. So you thought he did a good job here?
I do think he did a good job. I've never been a particularly huge fan of his. It's
Yeah.
rather bland, seems rather bland to me. And in fact, the early consideration was that he would play the General Scott role, which just seems totally impossible to me, given how good Lancaster was and how kind of bland Kirk Douglas was. I was actually more a fan and more exposed to his son than
Oh
to
yeah,
him.
sure. Michael Douglas.
Yeah,
Well, that's because he made movies when we were, I mean, he was the movie star when we were growing up,
right,
or
right.
yeah, more than growing up, but when we were
But I thought he
older.
was fine. He's not much of a romantic, as we saw in those scenes with Ava Gardner.
Yeah, I mean, he's not one of my favorite actors either. To my mind, he tends to overact with a lot of histrionics. The performance here is a lot more controlled. I think I also fine is exactly the words I was going to use. Fine is a straight shooting patriotic type. You mentioned earlier that he was going to play. He might have played General Scott, which is kind of another one problem that I have with the movie, though, is that he's a little old for the part of the Jiggs Casey, who's the you know
Adjutants or whatever.
eager subordinate. I mean, they're basically the same age, and they seem like peers, not like the biggest, most powerful general in the country, and some factotum. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought that a younger person should have played the part of Jiggs.
Yeah, but I thought he was good. The cleft chin is always so distracting to me
Yeah, I
in
know.
his movies.
Burt Lancaster is famous as Douglas, and the two of them appeared in six films together. Some of the other movies that he was in include From Here to Eternity, The Swimmer, Elma Gantry, Airport, Local Hero, The Sweet Smell of Success. What do you
Again,
think?
he was never a favorite of mine, but I thought he was perfectly cast here. I mean, he played it beautifully, right down to the perfectly fitted uniforms and the grooming and little things like, when he was testifying and a senator was challenging him, you saw his fingers subtly drumming on the table while the senator was talking. He played it not as a buffoon or over the top, but very sane, rational, polite to all his underlings, and even keeled. And so I thought he was really good.
Yeah, I thought he was good too. I mean, it's kind of perfect for him. He was, this hyper masculine type. He talks in this very clipped way of speaking. He doesn't show a lot of emotion or weakness. I think the character is a little bit underwritten. The movie seems to imply in the end that he's a megalomaniac instead of a patriot with a sincere fear of the Soviets. It's not clear all along whether he's got this legitimate policy problem or if he's just as I said, an egomaniac.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read that, Lancaster was another one of these big Hollywood liberals.
Hmm.
But when he first read the script, he was concerned that it wasn't fair enough to the conservative side of the argument. And he actually expressed some doubts about wanting to play it because of that, which is, boy, I wish we had that kind of feeling on both sides today, in our politics.
Well, you're
But
right. I
he
mean,
was concerned about that.
yeah, he was worried about the artistic integrity of the movie. It wouldn't, it needs to present, it has to be realistic.
Yeah, the other thing
Um,
is this in the script, the original script, he was supposed to die at the end in some silly accidental car crash, which is echoes of General Patton,
yeah,
who went out of this world on that kind of banana peel, this larger than life figure, and then some stupid, almost glorified fender bender at the end in Europe, and he's dead. And they were going to have that happen to Scott, and I think they came up with a much better and a more graceful ending.
yeah, that would be a terrible idea because that would imply, I mean, you would get conspiracy theories out of that.
Right,
He was
right.
killed.
Yeah.
I mean, in the real world, that would be a terrible thing to happen.
Well, thank God they didn't come up with him being killed by a sniper when he was riding in an open car.
Yeah, yeah, no one would believe that.
Three months later,
The president is played by Frederick March, who was a big leading man in the 1930s, and by the 1960s, he was a grand old man of cinema. He has the gravitas for the role, and you can imagine he'd be a canny politician in smoke-filled rooms. But he seems to lack the essential charisma that a national leader would have. If you told me that he succeeded to the job as vice president after the president died, uh, that I'd believe. It's sort of hard to believe that he'd be elected president in the same way it was hard to believe that LBJ would have been elected president.
yeah. I happen to think this was the best presidential portrayal of any film we've discussed so far, real or
Okay.
fictional. Um, I thought he was really, really good. He looked a little like LBJ at times, when he was in private, though with a completely different personality. I'm sure I've seen him in other things, but I just don't recall. The cast was in awe of him during production. He was the grand old man, master of the set. Spence Tracy was originally considered. I thought March should have gotten the Oscar nod. I think you might be right about his viability as a candidate, but in those days, going previous, I mean, everyone seemed sort of grayscale. All the politicians did, and not as colorful as we know today.
Yeah, no, I think he would have been more appropriate for the 30s and 40s. Someone like Harry Truman. Well, Harry Truman was a vice president who became
Yeah.
president. I mean,
Calvin Coolidge, was the vice president.
like Herbert Hoover, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
By the 60s, you would need to be a television personality. You'd have to be, kind of exciting, or at least have some um, overwhelming personality, reason, charisma to have people vote for you. I think he was like, it's 10 years too late for someone like him to be the president.
Yeah, it's interesting that they didn't make him into a Kennedy kind of president, which, they could have. And Kennedy was laying down the markers for making a big case for arms controls agreements. It's interesting that they chose sort of a fixture of the past, especially as this movie was supposed to be a little bit in the future, like
I
around
know, I know, I
1970.
know, I know. It's supposed to be around 1970. I was going to say, it reminds me, it has the same feeling as advise and consent, which we talked about a couple of movies ago,
Hmm.
where you've got this, it's all about an armed, how we're going to deal with the Russians. And in
Right.
both cases, the president is really eager for some sort of rapprochement with the Russians or the Soviet Union, and facing opposition from
Yeah.
the country.
Well,
Um,
but in fact, that's grounded in some reality because, as I mentioned,
mhm.
both Ike and JFK wanted to go in that direction.
Yeah, yeah. So another really major movie star is Ava Gardner, one of the great screen beauties of the 1950s. I think you've already mentioned that there's no reason. Well, I don't know. I thought you said there's no reason for her to be in this movie. It's just sort of like Gene Tierney was in Advice and Consent. There was not really
Yeah.
a big reason for her to be in that movie either, other than to have a major movie star
Yeah, but
uh,
there's more of a plot
woman.
point here. The plot point being would the love letters from General Scott to the Ava Gardner character be needed in order to stop the coup? I mean, so we'll get to the when we talk about plausibility, we'll get to that. But I mean, she did have a plot role to play, and I thought she played the aging, gin-soaked sex siren pretty well, which, according to Hollywood lore, was kind of realistic to the way she was at that time. Um, Stilted interchanges with Douglas, we've noted. And in fact, she did complain during the filming that Frankenheimer didn't give her scenes the attention and care that she thought they deserved and that he gave to other actors in other scenes. So that does add to the feeling that we need a female movie star in this movie.
I also have to. I talked earlier about how Frederick March looked aged in his early 60s, and in this movie, she's only 40 years old, and she looks matronly. I mean,
Yeah,
compare this to someone like Julia Roberts, who's 57, or Nicole Kidman, who's I don't know, well into her 50s, and they look a lot younger than Ava Gardner.
but in those days, I mean, look at
Yeah.
Judy Garland, Marilyn Monroe. I mean, they're all sad cases
Yeah, well,
and
Marilyn was
aging
only
fast.
36. Yeah, they
Yeah,
age fast. I mean, I guess that's how well, we've talked about the gin, the
yeah,
smoking, all the kind of behaviors that killed men off early. They kind of they hurt women's looks.
yeah.
We need to mention Rod Serling, who was a screenwriter who became immensely famous because of The Twilight Zone. He wrote other movies, Requiem for a Heavyweight and Planet of the Apes. Another Hollywood liberal and activist, but
Yeah, but he was perfect for this kind of movie. I
yeah,
thought it was a pretty intelligently written script for the most part. And, I think that adds to the gravitas, especially in retrospect, adds to the gravitas of this movie. I did want to mention Edmund O'Brien
hmm
and Martin Balsam.
yeah,
Um, I thought they were both good. O'Brien was a little too stock and cartoonish a character to me. But poor Marty Balsam. I mean, he was a really good utility player in some significant roles. But in 1960, he gets stabbed in the face and falls down the stairs to his death in Psycho. And here we are 4 years later. His body parts are strewn all over a Spanish mountain after a plane crash. So the poor guy, but his cigarette case with key evidence survives. So who says smoking's going to kill you? You may die, but your cigarettes survive.
yeah. Do you know that scene, by the way, where he climbs up when he's supposedly in Gibraltar and he climbs up a Air Force carrier,
Yeah, that was
aircraft
trespassing.
carrier?
It was
Um,
trespassing.
He was trespassing when they made the
Yeah,
movie. They had no permission to do that. They just put the actor on. He goes up there and they're taking pictures of him. And I don't know if they threw him out or what happened, but because I
yeah,
was
but the
wondering about that.
Pentagon didn't want to cooperate,
Yeah, oh, I can't. Can you imagine?
but
They would,
JFK did.
but he
So,
only cooperated to the extent of getting out of Washington so they could film in front of the White House that way. I mean, he
right.
couldn't tell the Pentagon what to do.
And if we accept any part of the thesis of this movie, if the Pentagon says no cooperation, there will be no cooperation,
Exactly.
regardless of what Kennedy thinks.
Well, I mean, I think ultimately he probably could have prevailed, but they would have leaked it and it would have been, it would have been a big PR stink. So it's
Right.
like you can get away with some stuff, but then you're gonna pay on the PR side. All right, let's talk about history. Let's first start by talking about the paranoid style of some thrillers for the 1960s, some of which we've already talked about. We talked about Advising Consent and Dr. Strangelove. But let's recap where things were back then. Surprisingly soon after World War II, Russia got the bomb, in part by stealing our secrets from Los Alamos. Joe McCarthy had come to prominence, claiming there were spies in the government, which there were, but not as many as he claimed. We all thought we might die in a nuclear war, and we felt we were in a life and death struggle with international communism, and that was even before the Cuban Missile Crisis and the JFK assassination.
Yeah, yeah. I think it captured the paranoid style pretty well, this film, atmospherically and issues wise. Um, it's important to note that the book and the film, while written in 62, shot in 63, and released in 64, was meant to take place down the road a few years, as we mentioned. And there was an ongoing debate right at this time about how to deal with the Soviets, how to deal with China. Do we negotiate or confront? Do we make treaties or not? Um, is the domino theory right or wrong? Do we do proxy wars or not? All these were real issues. They were ripped from the headlines.
Yeah,
And so,
this movie really
yeah.
was ripped from the headlines. I mean, there's no question about it. It's
And what's really interesting is that, again, this is after the book was written, but during the movie making, which conceivably could have impacted, script changes and things like that. What's really interesting is that in 1963, there really was a huge debate over the first nuclear test ban treaty. It
Mhm.
was a partial test ban in the atmosphere and under the sea. And so this really happened. This debate really went on. It passed the Senate in a bipartisan vote of 80 to 19. So it wasn't even close. The public was pretty much behind it. And so this was all happening. And in contrast to the apocalyptic response of those against the treaty in the movie, what happened in real life? The Republicans nominated Goldwater in 64, who was the leader of the opposition to the treaty. Now, granted, there were lots of other issues, including the death of JFK, but the public had a chance to vote. Instead of a coup, we had an election.
Right.
And in that election, we voted against the guy that was against the treaty and voted for the guy who promised to keep us out of war. However, that worked out. So we can
Well,
call this paranoia, but it's also genuinely legitimate debate. And it was resolved democratically, not with a military coup.
right. Well, let's also, I'm gonna jump ahead 20 years and 25 years, and Ronald Reagan, the most conservative Republican, since or Calvin Coolidge proposes exactly what this treaty was going to propose, which is to get rid of all nuclear weapons on both sides.
Yes, yes.
So anyway, all
And
right.
the
Well,
foreign policy establishment was out of their minds over it.
I know.
The
Um,
other thing is the role of the military was a very real issue as well
mhm.
in the historical snapshot of this era. Would they respect their subordinate role as their fiefdoms and resources grew? And this is what Ike was talking about in his farewell address, the growing influence, sought and unsought, of the military industrial complex. And so, again, I think this was all really ripped from the headlines kind of issues.
Okay, so while we're discussing this, as part of this discussion, let's talk about some of the implausibilities in this movie.
Sure.
I came up with six implausibilities. I don't know how many you did, but let's.
Well, rattle them off.
Okay, my first one. I'll do one. You do one. My
Yeah.
first one is like where's the Secretary of Defense? He and his deputies and assistant secretaries should be all over this. I mean, he runs the Pentagon. How could all this be happening under his nose? It's almost like he doesn't even exist.
Yeah. And this is something you see in a lot of the political and White House dramas in the current day. You can see this in the hot Netflix series, The Diplomat. It's
Yeah,
like two or three people are involved in the whole government.
right.
And you saw that in the House of Cards to an extent. So I don't think it's unusual. I think it's for dramatic and cost purposes, probably.
You do it for dramatic purposes because once you think that there's a Secretary of Defense who's in the same building as General Scott, you realize the whole thing couldn't happen like this. But anyway,
Right.
the whole
Okay.
premise, I wouldn't be able to make the movie.
Right. One of mine is um, in those days, what TV anchorman would be a right winger like this, like in this movie? I don't know if you could find one back then, but there was a right wing TV anchor host that was the big booster
Right.
of General Scott and even the coup.
Right. I mean, they're looking back to the 1930s when they had some of the radio announcers were very right wing.
Yeah.
But you're right. In the 60s, the TV was definitely liberal leaning. Okay, my number two is I think Jiggs Casey is a bad spy. Instead of acting like he's going along with the coup, which would have enabled him to get more evidence, he gets self-righteous enough to make General Scott suspicious, right? I mean, like play
Yeah.
along a little bit. And then when he goes over to Ava Gardner's apartment to get intel on General Scott's plans, he grabs her love letters and gets kicked out without her even finding out if she knows anything about the coup. I
Yeah.
mean,
He gets caught by General Scott rifling through General Scott's desk,
right.
you know,
And looking at the
knowing,
maps
yeah,
of
knowing that
Texas,
Scott's right outside in
I
the
know.
anteroom. And then he gets caught on his hands and knees practically in Ava Gardner's apartment when all she did was go in to get a martini, you know.
Yeah, I know
So
exactly.
yeah,
And when the general Scott comes back and says, "What did you think about my speech?" Instead of saying, "Oh, that was great," I completely agree with you and all that, he's like, we're a nation of laws. We're
yeah,
military men, so we've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. I mean, like that's a tip off that you're not, on the team.
yeah,
Bad spy.
yeah.
Okay.
My next one, that a drunken senator and a junior officer could single-handedly break out of a secret base in the middle of Texas in the early 60s and in a flash make it to Dulles Airport in a commercial aircraft um, to continue their efforts against the plot.
Well,
How
and
did
then to make
how and when? Yeah,
Yeah. And to
how
make
do you
that
get from?
worse, not only did they manage to do all that, but the second they get to Dulles, he disappears out of, someone, comes in and swoops him, takes them away before the senator, before,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
that was kind of funny.
all right, this is a treaty. Okay, so this whole issue is about a treaty that was debated and passed by the Senate, which requires a two-thirds majority. And now we find out at the beginning of the movie that the president has a 29% approval rating without explaining why. And at this point, why are they even debating about implementing the treaty? Why are they still having Senate hearings and demonstrations and all that? I mean, it's already passed.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to get a little grander now
Okay.
in plausibility. Basically, that any coup could be so overt in the United States. It would be doomed to failure. The country's too vast, too rebellious a citizenry for a couple of million soldiers, which is, remember, that's all we have, could control 300 million people across 3,000 miles of territory in all these different media markets. It would be silent and slow motion coups instead, terms which I believe are now frequently used to describe when powerful forces, insidious, secretive, manipulative, Orwellian forces are trying to control us. So I think the basic premise, well, a fun what if to think about, and I don't hold the book or the movie, hold it against them for positing this what if. My response is going to be, it's going to be much more insidious and never that overt.
Right, right. I mean, somewhat related to this. I mean, I make the point that this movie assumes the military is full of crazy right-wing nutcases, when the way you advance in any bureaucracy is by being cautious and politically savvy. I mean, I just don't believe that. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple of crazy generals, but in general, they get along by going along. Um,
Yeah. But
Plus,
I mean,
most I was just going to say one more thing. Most coups occur in a period of crisis or escalating disorder. They just don't happen out of the blue, you know? It just,
yeah, I think a case in point is what we saw in 13 Days,
right,
the movie about the Cuban Missile Crisis,
right,
where Kennedy and Bobby were worried that LeMay and others were going to deliberately try to trigger something in Cuba so as to cause the kind of war with the Soviets that they supposedly wanted and the Kennedys didn't. That's how you get the situation.
right,
That's how you work your way beyond what the civilian leadership wants. You
right.
don't do it by trying to control 3,000 miles of territory in the entirety of the American populace.
Well, and also you said there are like 3 million people in the military, but there's probably only 3,000 people in the military that even know what's going on in this movie. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
and the Navy isn't even, on board yet. I'll also say, let's see. Okay, we talked about the movie being set in the future. It's either 1969 or 1974,
right.
according to how the days of the week line up. This explains why we have the president talking on a Zoom call 40 years before teleconferencing was invented. But the prediction of what the country would look like at the end of the 1960s could not be more off. I mean, that is
Right.
early 1950s, not 1970.
Yeah, they were better on imagining the technology
Right.
than they were on imagining the culture.
I mean, no one could have perceived, no one could have guessed, I suppose, that there were going to be hippies and, counterculture and youth, rebellion and all that. And that none of that is even present in this movie.
Yeah. The last one I have is this notion that the romantic extramarital letters between General Scott and Ava Gardner would be such an overpowering device that it could stop a coup if exposed, or that a president believing it could stop the coup would actually not use the letters to save the country. I mean,
Right.
if you really thought your country was on the verge of a military coup, of course you'd use the letters,
Right.
which,
Right.
by the way, wouldn't have stopped General Scott.
No, absolutely
So,
not.
so
I
I
mean,
thought that was an implausible device, but it was still fun to
all right.
think
I
about.
have one more thing, and that's my my wife pointed out something which I actually knew, but I'll give her credit for this. The Preakness, which is a race that was supposed to run at the on the seventh day of the coup, on the day of the coup rather. It's on a Saturday, not on a Sunday. And it's been on a
Yeah,
Saturday. It's been on a Saturday since 1934. Still is now. I mean, how could he? How I don't know how they could make such a stupid mistake.
yeah, that
No.
isn't, that's, yeah. Let me say one more thing about the way this movie postulates its what if in the historical times in which it did, namely 63 and 64. We just finished 8 years of having a president who was a real general
Yeah, right.
and who became a general again after he left office. Eisenhower.
Yeah,
We've
yeah.
had 12 generals who became presidents so far, and only one in the 20th century. And boy, was he tough on the chiefs and on the Pentagon. He went over their budgets with a green eye shade. He was confronted at least two times, maybe three, with serious proposals from his generals to use tactical or nuclear weapons in various theaters. He was implored to put ground troops in Asia and Vietnam and in the Middle East. And he said, hell no. He wanted to actually share all of our nuclear technology with the Russians in his Atoms for Peace proposal. And said later his biggest failure as president was not succeeding in arms control and lowering the tensions of the Cold War. So having a general as president, albeit elected, wasn't so bad after all, was it, Mr. Frankenheimer?
Very good point. And your passion for Eisenhower is noted. We are looking and waiting for a movie about Eisenhower to come out so we can elaborate on these points, much, much greater detail.
And maybe it actually helped control the Pentagon to have a guy who knew where all the
Of course,
bodies were buried and all the tricks.
of course.
It reminds me of when FDR started the Securities Exchange Commission, and he appointed as the first chairman a guy named Joseph Kennedy. And he said, because if anybody knows how to we all the finagling and cheating and wheeling dealing, it's Joe Kennedy.
Joe Kennedy, of course, being JFK and Bobby Kennedy's father.
Yes.
All right. Let's talk about our favorite scenes.
Well,
You have one?
yeah, I have to like the showdown scene
Okay.
between the president and the general. I thought it was very well filmed and acted. It was dramatic and it was suspenseful. I really liked that was probably my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, that was my favorite scene too. I complained a little bit about how they, they turned. Basically, it was once, each of them making speeches against the other, and I thought it was a little obvious of putting the themes of the movie into their mouths so overtly on the nose. But it was a great effective scene dramatically.
Yeah.
I like the cocktail party where everyone's a little bit drunk and a little bit more
Yeah.
discreet. It reminds me of the days when people from different parties would actually socialize instead of trying to put each other into jail.
Yeah. And make snide comments over martinis to each
Right.
other instead of the F bombs over
Oh,
social
right,
media.
right,
Yeah,
right.
you're right.
Got anything else?
Yeah, I like the excuse me, I like the spread over several vignettes, but the air crash episode. First, it showed how big events can be shaped by quirky happenstance and accidents. This is said about World War One all the time, how World War One started. And and I especially liked it when the president was told of the crash and the death of his very good friend, his reaction. I thought that was just really good acting, really moving.
Well, didn't you think that the movie implied that the plane had been shot down?
I thought there was a hint of a suggestion, but
I mean,
not
it's kind of a
really.
coincidence,
Yeah,
I
but
mean, there were more plane crashes in those days than there are now.
yeah,
Okay. I don't have any more. I mean, the movie was, I thought, fairly consistently across the board, very tense, and it was hard to pick out
right,
favorite
right.
scenes because it was all kind of evenly good.
Yeah, I thought in terms of the efficiency and skill of filmmaking, I thought the whole scene that introduced the president and then moved him from the Oval to the swimming pool, I thought that was very efficient, establishing a characterization in just a couple minutes. I thought that was good from a cinematic standpoint.
Anything else?
No,
Favorite lines?
when the president who's referring to Scott says he's not the enemy is an age, the nuclear age. Maybe a little obvious, but that's the point they were trying to make.
One of my favorite lines is from General Scott himself. Um, he says, when he was testifying about the treaty, he says, I'm suggesting there hasn't been a piece of paper written in the history of mankind that could serve as a deterrent to a Pearl Harbor. I wonder why we haven't learned that lesson by now. Every 20 years or so, we have to pick ourselves up bleeding and pay for the mistake. I might add, Senator, these mistakes are delivered to us COD by peace loving men and bought and paid for with the lives of other men.
Yeah, that's
I
real.
mean, I think
That's
that he
good.
makes a good point. I mean, treaties by themselves are worth no more than I mean, we've seen this throughout history. Treaties
Right,
don't really, they're not worth any more than the paper they're written on.
right. I liked when near the end, when General Scott calls Jiggs, "You're a Judas,"
Yeah,
and Jiggs says, "I know who Judas was, a man I worked for and admired, and who disgraced the 4 stars on his uniform."
yeah,
That was a good comeback.
yeah, that was a good comeback. I had that too. The president's response to Scott, why in God's name? Don't you have faith in the system of government you're so hell bent to protect? It's a good point. I mean, if you think America is so great, why are you destroying the government?
Yeah, run for office.
Run for office. He said
He
that.
might have done better than Barry Goldwater.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I like it was kind of humorous. There wasn't a lot of humor, but near the start, and Senator Clark, the drunken senator, says to the president, "You know, riots and unemployment notwithstanding, you are an exceptionally fine president." I thought that was pretty telling.
Um, the president has another line, another good argument. Did it ever occur to you that if you took over the government by force, you wouldn't have to wait a year and 9 months for the funeral? If the Soviet Union saw our government taken over by a military dictatorship, how long would it take them to break the treaty, possibly even attack us? I think perhaps a question of days, perhaps hours, certainly weeks.
It's a good
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
I
good point.
mean, there's good points on both sides of the debate in this
Right,
movie.
right.
That's
And
all
yeah,
I have on lines.
yeah, I have one other where he says this is when he was the president when he's having his press conference. In recent months, a whisper that we have somehow lost our greatness, that we have not the strength to win without war, the struggles for liberty throughout the world. This is slander because our country is strong, strong enough to be a peacemaker. It is proud, proud enough to be patient. The whispers, the detractors of the violent men are wrong. We will remain strong and proud, peaceful and patient, and we will see a day when on this earth all men will walk, well, all men will walk out of the long tunnels of tyranny into the bright sunshine of freedom. So those last lines aren't so great. But the point I think he's making is that we're a great country, and people who say, we can't take care of ourselves are underestimating us. And I think that's
Yeah,
true. I mean, we always complain that we're being taken advantage of, or that we're weak, and yet here we are 60 years later, still more dominant than we've been since the end of World War II.
yeah, yeah. It's a good point.
Okay. All right, let's talk about the relevance or comparison to politics and society today.
Oh yeah, I think it has tremendous relevance today, though maybe unintentionally. And it gets to the point you were making in your last quote. What the film does, it takes a legitimate policy debate over armaments treaties and catastrophizes it,
Right.
suggesting it could result in a military takeover by the losing side of the debate. Since then, and especially today, one side or the other repeatedly claims similar kind of scenarios in similar catastrophic terms, suggesting that the country will be done, finished, if the other side prevails in an election. Democracy will end. There will never be another election. I think everybody on all sides needs to calm down. So instead of what we saw then, the paranoid style in American politics, what we're seeing today is the apocalyptic style in American politics. And I'm kind of tired of it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, we sometimes ask whether this movie could be made today. In fact, it actually was made today. Paul Thomas Anderson recently made a movie called One Battle After Another that imagines a world in which the military has much more power and influence than it does today. It doesn't say there's been a coup, but it seems like the country's been overly militarized, and the movie's being lauded as an amazingly relevant to our situation today. There's always a market for conspiracy movies from the left. There's the parallax view, in which a giant corporation is killing presidential candidates. Your favorite, JFK, in which the CIA, the military, and the mob all get together to kill the president. Enemy of the state, in which the NSA kills a congressman opposed to a counterterrorism bill. A friend of mine recently mentioned the Sinclair Lewis novel, It Could Happen Here from the 1930s, which he said that was relevant today. I mean, all these movies, you see these catastrophizing movies, and everyone says, "Oh, they're relevant," and we've been talking like this for 90 years.
Yeah,
Um, 7 Days in May gets one thing right. We have lost a lot of freedom to the government over the past 60 years, but it's not the military that's gained power, but a slowly creeping bureaucracy that's done it.
right. I agree with that. But I do think the role of the military and the spy and surveillance state is another relevant to today issue. Their ability to steer events at home and abroad, probably more at home, abroad than at home. They do get too big for their britches on some occasions. You know, the Joint Chiefs spied on Nixon and Kissinger in '69. They had people rifling through briefcases in the White House and in burn bags to find out what Nixon and Kissinger were privately up to. This was uncovered, but Nixon wanted to keep it a secret for some similar reasons to the way the president in this movie wanted to keep the coup a secret. He didn't want to be embarrassed that he was so unable to control the government. And then more recently, Bob Woodward, no less, revealed that General Milley, as Joint Chiefs at the end of Trump 1, was doing all sorts of things that could be defined as undermining the civilian authority of the country. And so I think these are relevant issues. How do we strengthen the relationship between the military and the civilians who are in charge, but also get more trust between them as partners? I think that's a big issue for today.
Yeah. All right. We're not going to solve that problem today. So if you were a high school teacher, would you assign this movie?
Yes, I would. I think it would be, I think it's fast paced enough that the kids could overlook the black and white, which they don't like. But I would. I think if I was teaching this period in American history, I would.
I don't think I would. I just think it's kind of unrealistic. I don't think the coup, as we've talked about, the coup would be able to be pulled off the way it did. I'm not sure what they would learn from watching this movie, other than people were kind of hysterical all the way around in the early
But the only
60s.
thing the addendum I would make to that is the coup didn't work. and,
The coup didn't work,
and
I know.
it didn't work. And
Right.
so, and one reason it didn't work was because of whistleblowers and underlings. It
Okay.
was jigs and it was the other Joint Chiefs of Staff that backed down. So I think there's enough lessons and reassurance here to to bring this right up to today for a high school audience.
Okay. What's your grade for the movie?
Oh, A all the way.
Okay. I actually was I put it at B plus.
Okay.
Maybe a high B plus, A B plus, A minus. I mean, I think it's good. When I'm watching these movies, I think, oh, that couldn't happen, that couldn't happen, that couldn't happen. And that kind of always brings down the score for me.
Yeah, but you can do say that in almost any what if movie,
Yeah, yeah,
almost any. But
almost.
anyway, that's not a bad grading average.
Okay, so I think that's the end of the movie, end of our discussion. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Not a thing.
Okay. So we'll close on that note. Again, I'll just remind everyone the podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and most podcast platforms. You can subscribe there. Please do. If you have any comments, just send them to me at garyholmes76 at gmail. And last chance for final words, Jim.
0.
0. Okay, great. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Bye.